Hello, you might have been expecting a new episode of First Contact.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be back with one of them, maybe at some point this year. But for now, we are focusing on Star Trek Picard. So you can listen to that on another feed at P4 Picard. The first episode will be here, but we hope you'll join us for that ride. And I promise we will be back to finish season 4 at some point in 2020. You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Hello and welcome to P for Picard. No, not what Jean-Luc orders when he visits Rise's classiest brothels, but a brand new podcast covering Star Trek's newest streaming show. Every legend has a destiny. Every podcast has some middle-class white guys. I'm delighted to welcome Star Trek Next Generation superfan and all-round Trekspert, James Kluski. Hello.
Hello.
And also here at our round table, the brains behind the Garbage podcast and a man we forced to watch TNG, Alex Newsom. Hello.
Hello.
For the last 7 years or so, we have been hosting First Contact, where James and I, as Trek veterans, have been guiding Star Trek The Next Generation virgin, Alex, on the voyages of the Enterprise D, and he's been reacting by forgetting what happened in the episodes. But now, we needed something else to talk about. So here we are. I'm Andre, and I'll be guiding our intrepid crew through the first season of Star Trek Picard. But first, James, what happens in this one?
Something is wrong with Data, and it's up to Picard to rebel against the Federation to save the Baku people.
No, James, that's not right. We weren't watching Star Trek Insurrection. We're watching Star Trek Picard.
Picard, that's the one with all the xenophobes, isn't it? Right, the xenophobes, right. Ah, okay. Following the Xindi attack on Earth...
No, look, that's Star Trek Enterprise, and you're probably going to go for Terra Prime. I think that's the one which has got sort of post 9/11 disaster, which means that the Starfleet must compromise its principles.
Yeah, that's really good. Why can't we talk about that?
Later.
Oh.
Picard.
Okay. Star Trek Picard. 20 years on from the events of Star Trek Nemesis, Picard is haunted by dreams of his fallen crewmate and friend, Data. Having become disillusioned with Starfleet's behaviour during the Romulan crisis, Picard has retired to the family vineyard and has lost his drive and purpose. But all that changes when he meets a young woman named Daj, who has suddenly developed superhuman abilities. Could she be part of a mystery that is deeply connected to his past? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the answer when we ask a question. The first reviews are in. Alan Sepinwall of Rolling Stone said, "There's a clear purpose to revisiting the character at this advanced stage. It all feels cohesive and confident in a way that Discovery, even in its good moments, never quite has." Daniel Feinberg in The Hollywood Reporter said, "The events that get stretched over 3 40-minute episodes of Picard probably could have been dispatched in the opening 10 minutes of a feature and surely could have been delivered in 1 or 2 TV installments without sacrificing room to breathe." While the EW's Darren Frannick said, "Star Trek Picard boldly goes nowhere new, grave-robbing fan-familiar concepts when it's not distracting you with pointless fight scenes." But none of those views matter, none at all. So, Alex, let's start with you. What do you think?
Well, I think going into it, it was one of those things of where we were debating what to expect. I don't think any of us expected for 1 minute what we were going to be seeing was a continuation of The Next Generation, and nor did they ever make out it was going to be. Perhaps the more guiding light was Star Trek Discovery. And I think certainly my opinion and your opinion of Star Trek Discovery is it's a mixed bag. I mean, especially when you sack the showrunner halfway through a series. But this, it was better than I expected, I have to admit. However, I would hasten to add, it's difficult to see at the moment where it's going to play out. There's a lot of things set up. But it felt like Star Trek to me. A new type of Star Trek, perhaps, but it felt good.
Should I point out that they've already got a new showrunner for Picard Season 2?
Oh, for Christ's sake.
We'll get to that. James, what were your broad thoughts on the first episode?
I went into it thinking it was going to be terrible. And to be honest, I only watched it because we were going to be doing this podcast. I would just not have bothered. But I thought it was okay. It was fine. It wasn't basically fine. It wasn't there, but it was fine. It has a lot of the issues that I expected. But a lot of the biggest criticisms I have of it are not the criticisms I expected. And they're things which I actually like to debate. So in that sense, I almost like the fact that there are certain elements that I don't like about it, which we will get to.
I think I was surprised because I loved it when I was watching it. And I still might have that feeling. I like it certainly more than I love it because when I think about it, I think the problems perhaps are that it includes a lot of genre cliches, and that's not necessarily a problem because it's what you do with them that counts. But I do feel we've seen a lot of the stuff that's on show in Battlestar Galactica, Blade Runner, Westworld, which is fine. That means they're playing with sort of contemporary sci-fi ideas. Okay, but if they fall too much into cliche, that could be a problem. In fact, the cliches on show were the opposite of what I was expecting. From the trailers, I expected a chosen one narrative. They've gone in a different direction from that.
A bit.
But
it's still a bit there.
Well, a bit. But I think the interesting thing was, we left Star Trek The Next Generation with Picard sitting down with his friends and playing poker on the Enterprise D. We pick up, albeit in a dream sequence, oddly a dream sequence with exterior shots, a dream sequence which we've got Blue Skies playing, which Data sang in Star Trek Nemesis, so you've got nods to that. But he's on the Enterprise D, in 10 forward, playing poker with Data. So it's a clear lineage between these shows, and a very deliberate one. You've got a scene from All Good Things, followed by Picard on the Vineyard. Again, something that we saw in All Good Things. So it's a show that very much, although is not a continuation of the show that we knew, it is very much a continuation of the show that we knew. It's not the same show, but here's a couple of the characters that you knew, doing something you're familiar with. Now we're going off in a new direction.
Although they don't fully respect All Good Things because Picard doesn't have space dementia.
That's true. Or a fluffy beard.
No, he doesn't have a beard.
I'm not watching anymore. That's ruined the show for me.
They better announce that season 2 has a beard and dementia. Otherwise, why bother?
I think it's a good point to point out as well. I think that the three of us are looking for different things out of this series. I think, for example, the two of you are probably looking for much more of a continuation of TNG in themes and in terms of continuity, whereas what I want to see from it is, a bit of that, but I want to see how they intend on moving forward with Star Trek as a franchise. One of the big problems I had with Discovery is that it should have been an entry point for lots of people into watching the show, and they sort of tried to market it as that for a little bit, but so much of it just wasn't entry point at all. Now, out of the two shows, that's the one that should have been rather than this, but with the publicity this one has, I wanted to see it have some degree of accessibility. I think it treads the line of that, more or less, but we'll get to that as we go.
I think the first episode treads that line, but from the looks of things, it's going to going a lot more in-depth in Star Trek lore.
True, although, I mean, the trailer that we saw, a lot of the things that you expected might have been, we're going to go right into the depths of this. Look, there's the Captain Picard Day banner, and then, no, it's nothing in this, really. So, I don't know how well you can judge this show from the trailers currently.
So Alex Kurtzman, who is one of the creators of the show, the mandate was to make it a more psychological show, a character study about this man in his emeritus years. There are so few shows that allow a significantly older protagonist to be driver. I don't think it's that show, is it? Because as much as okay, we do have this older character as a driver, and that's great. I think that's brilliant. Patrick Stewart is obviously still a force to be reckoned with. I think he's putting in a superb performance, but it's not a slow character study. In fact, I did see people on my Twitter timeline saying, "Oh, I wish we'd just been able to spend an episode with him on the vineyard before the story starts." I have sympathy with that view, but I don't agree with that view, because a story must be motivated. I do think we need, and especially I guess for modern audiences, you do have to keep things moving. People say Star Trek Next Generation is boring now because they talk the whole episode, which is sort of a problem we have with Discovery, and it does need to move. But this is an action sci-fi show as much as it is a study of a character.
It's a continuation of the films. This feels to me like a natural progression if you were carrying on what they were doing in the films, but today, this is what I would expect it to look like. And to be honest, from what we've seen so far, I mean, kind of like Star Wars has been doing with The Mandalorian, what you're seeing is a film stretched out across multiple episodes instead.
Which is a good thing, because they're taking, no pun intended, the best of both worlds. They're taking the fact that you can have much more time with characters as TV provides, whereas they're having the scale and the budget of a film. The issue I have is that they also feel the need to add ridiculous action sequences. And at times they're only hand-waving away the fact that we've got an older lead. The main part I'm thinking of is when they're running up the stairs and they just add one little sequence where Picard goes, "No, I need to rest." And then the next sequence they're at the top.
More from an acting point of view than a character one, that it's very clear they used a stunt double who bears no resemblance to the physical shape of Patrick Stewart for that running sequence.
He managed to come back from being assimilated by the Borg, but he's now defeated by a set of stairs. A Dalek is now more mobile than Patrick Stewart.
But I think there is something in that, because although you have a ridiculous part in that scene, and we are jumping about the episode a little bit, but that doesn't matter. You have this explosion which throws this 90-something-year-old man across a roof, and then it's like, "Oh no, you're fine." And it's like, well, which is he? Is he old and frail, or can he survive an explosion in his face? They didn't need to have him that near it, really.
When I saw him getting out of breath on the stairs, what it was making me think of is when Aid Edmondson and Rick Mail used to talk about, we might make another series of Bottom in the future, but as both of us as really old men. And I thought, wow, here we are. I look forward to season 2, where Picard has to deal with the trauma of kidney stones.
I mean, there was one sequence sort of like that in his house with his Romulan housekeepers, and she tells him, "You never wash your hands. It's been 10 years." And I thought, ugh.
Especially with that dog.
You've got to talk about the dog. We've got number one there.
I can't wait for those behind-the-scenes features. Just Patrick Stewart sitting there going, "And I've got to tell you, that dog, he humped everything that came on set. It was actually wonderful continuity with my previous number one, Jonathan Frakes."
That dog, I mean, we have to talk about it. Giant testicles.
Giant bollocks. As Red Dwarf graphics man Matthew Clark said on Twitter, it is unusual to see that many shots of a dog's testes on TV.
Is it a visual way of telling us that this show is the dog's bollocks?
That's the money shot.
And to think at one point they could only afford a horse for TNG.
How big are horse bollocks?
Well, in season 2 we can find out. Whoopi's coming in style.
I'm not a particular fan of Picard having a dog called Number One. It does seem a bit disrespectful to Riker, but I guess it could have been worse. He could have called the dog Robert.
He lives on a vineyard, and by the looks of it, very rarely leaves. He's probably pissed all day.
We should mention in the opening scene, the dream sequence, it took one scene in this show for a planet to explode. One scene.
Yeah, and I guess planets exploding is kind of... I guess it's part of the foundations of Alex Kurtzman's Star Trek universe, because, of course, this storyline follows on directly from Star Trek 2009, the supernova they speak of, which in that film was apparently supposed to explode the entire galaxy, I understand. Okay, fine. That doesn't necessarily matter.
We'll ignore that piece of awful science.
Spock was very old. Spock was very, very old.
He was just exaggerating.
Just exaggerating for effect. Mind melds get very confused at times. So, a supernova, which was going to destroy Romulus, of course he goes to stop that. He wants to create a black hole to suck in the supernova to buy more time for an evacuation, I guess. But that, in this timeline, has created a very different world. I get what do you think of that world and how that's been set up? Obviously, Romulus is now in a different place. The Federation and Starfleet seem to be in a bit of a different place. I guess it's a darker future reflecting a darker present day.
I've seen various schools of thought on it. I think the most ardently against it, I know the two of you haven't seen what it is yet, but Red Letter Media particularly hated that, saying, well, that's not what the Federation is. I don't know that I can agree. I get that you would want the sort of nice version of the future. However, I feel if you're doing that, generally that comes out of relatively politically stable times. And science fiction generally tends to reflect more turbulent times. And as such, it feels the right direction to go in if you're making a show now.
I'm a little conflicted. The main thing that I would think back to is Star Trek Enterprise, where 7 million people were killed on Earth by aliens, and then the Enterprise had to go out and stop them and save the world and all that. But meanwhile, on Earth, there was a splinter group of xenophobic right-wing people who formed Terra Firma, which was all about getting all aliens off Earth and just making it all humans. And in fact, they went to Mars and took charge of the Mars array to attack Earth to get all the aliens away. They were the bad guys. Now they're making the Federation the bad guys. They've been taken over by these xenophobes because 90,000 people on Mars were killed. That doesn't seem right. Why would all of the Federation turn xenophobic over 90,000 people when there's humanitarian efforts to help? And they must know that if they don't help the Romulans, it will cause even more instability in the quadrant.
Yeah, but then Brexit. Trump.
But it's so simple. It doesn't take into account the history we have with the Federation. It just ignores all that and says, no, we want it to be a parallel.
Brexit doesn't take account of the history we have with the European Union. It's, again, that doesn't feel incongruous to me, given the time we're in. Were we making this show at another time, I would absolutely agree with you. If this was made in 2009, it would seem a much bleaker affair in some respects.
Well, I guess some people would argue that in the 1960s, at that time, the Cold War, that it was a very politically complicated time as well. But I believe it's more, and let's be very clear, the Federation, Starfleet, is a reflection of America, and in some ways how America views itself. So Kirk is John F. Kennedy in space, and it's about American exceptionalism. Our values are the right values, and we are taking them to the savages in some way. And I think now is a bit of a time of reflection on that. So you have different views of how things are. So Star Trek Next Generation is a very talky, touchy, feely show. Everyone's in touch with their emotions, and it was a time when Gene Roddenberry he very much
was touchy-feely.
I think he believed that humanity was going to this perfect utopian place where there was no drama, there was no conflict. Now, this is not Roddenberry Star Trek. Deep Space Nine wasn't even Roddenberry Star Trek, but I think you can see there are elements of this. So you have the Daystrom Institute, which has been shut down and gutted, and it doesn't exist, except it does exist in name. So you can say that's the Environmental Protection Agency in America. But there's a precedent for that in Star Trek. So you've got eugenics. You've got the eugenics wars, and then it's because that happened, there is no research into gene resequencing, there, even though it could cure millions of lives. And you have the paranoia of the Federation, which you've seen in something like Deep Space Nine's Home Front. You have people questioning what the Federation does, which of course you see in the Maquis storyline, which plays out in Star Trek Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. So you have all of this, and plus you have every asshole admiral who ever lived, who are always making bad decisions.
And if we're talking about this series being like a continuation of the films, Insurrection?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Where Picard says they're making the wrong choice, they're doing the wrong thing, I'm walking away.
I think over time, and I don't think this is necessarily a new thing, I think it's just perhaps more in sharp focus with this. You're right that the focus has changed from the collective bringing forward the moral argument to the individual trying to stand up without going into libertarianism.
And I don't like that.
Yeah.
Logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Or the one.
And Deep Space Nine, it wasn't afraid to criticize the Federation, just like Star Trek Insurrection. It wasn't a perfect future, but it was getting there, and I think that message of hope that we could get there was a very good thing, and that is undermined in Picard. It doesn't feel like this Federation can ever get back to where it was.
Yeah, but I mean, it will do. I mean, the problem is with the ideal future, and it's something they discover very quickly in The Next Generation, is there's no story there. Hence, as you say, that's why we end up with a parade of admirals who are just dicks. Because without conflict, story can't happen.
And you know what? I think a lot of this is good, and I think it's well done. The Romulan disaster is a sort of Katrina event where the government ignored them. The attack on Mars, you can say, is very much a 9/11 type event, one that everyone remembers where they were when that happened, and and obviously you have the Romulans, who are people who are not welcome in a country anymore. So it's not subtle, but I think it works in this. What I don't particularly like is that the Federation News Network is Fox News.
Yeah.
It's a bit on the nose, and it doesn't feel right, because it's not just Earth. You're right. It is a quadrant of the galaxy represented here.
I hated that. That's exactly what I've got written down. It's just uncomfortable having Fox News in the future.
Again, though, to me that doesn't seem unrealistic.
But does it seem like it's part of the world that we inhabited? Yes. I just feel, though, that television, I know you can say Star Trek Generations, they've got the news crews in there, and Jake Sisko writes for the newswires. I almost feel like this is a future where the written word is more important than television. I mean, when you go to that city when Daj is running away and she stops and looks in a window and watches TV, and I think, well, this isn't really the Star Trek I recognise. And to be fair, we don't see a lot of Earth. It just feels like in Discovery when, you know, a screen is an antiquated bit of technology, even though that doesn't really fit in with anything else. And the only reason there's one on the Enterprise is because Pike hates holograms, and then everyone seems to be watching TV, 150 years later.
Well, I think you've hit on the answer there, is that we don't really spend time on Earth. This isn't really something that you have cause to come across in this amount of depth until now. But no, the idea of, I mean, even if it wasn't Fox News, I mean, you don't need, obviously that's what they're going for, but I wouldn't say you necessarily would have to insist that was the only parallel, because, I mean, you can see not dissimilar interviews on our channels in the UK. You see,
the Today programme is a decent example.
Yeah, so the Today programme, you'll see examples on Newsnight, and then you'll see even quite justified examples from the other political end of the spectrum, but on Channel 4 News, if you watch one of Christian Gary-Murphy's interviews, they're pretty straight to the money from the start. So no, it doesn't feel out of place to me.
I think Deep Space Nine did it much better. There was a great episode where Jake Sisko had stayed behind on the station when it was taken over by the Dominion, and they refused to let any of his stories go back to the Federation because they're negative about the Dominion, and the Dominion just want him to tweak the stories to fit their, essentially, propaganda. I think that's a much better story about journalism than in Picard. It just feels like a generic parallel to now. There's nothing much to it that makes it fit.
Well, there's not really supposed to be, though, is there? Because, I mean, it's a brief scene to give Picard the reason to speech.
It's a brief scene, but with huge ramifications on the future Earth.
It's a plot device in some ways. It's an exposition device, so it lets them deliver that. But I guess we could say we as I don't want to speak for everyone, but fairly left-leaning liberal people, we somehow feel like we're now living in a world where our views are in a minority, where not everyone agrees with us, and we'd never expect anyone to agree with us, but that there are a lot of people in this world whose views I don't recognise and I can't even begin to reconcile. And perhaps that's what this is saying. That this is saying there's a lot of people who think this way. It's populism, and I think it's a bit on the nose, but it does a job dramatically, at least.
It certainly wouldn't be the first time that Trek's just gone bang on the nose. Or missed the nose and just smacked the face with a 2x4. I'm looking at you, Code of Honor.
So I guess the main character that we're introduced to is Daj. I guess sort of very much a science fiction cliche, in that this week in Doctor Who we saw a very similar scene to the one we saw in Star Trek Picard. When someone's threatened, suddenly they activate. It's Jason Bourne. It is one of the Cylons in Battlestar Galactica. So there is sort of a cliche character, the ordinary young woman who suddenly finds that she has extraordinary abilities. I guess you can even say something like Firefly. You can read into that. There's all sorts of examples you can probably find in modern science fiction, but I think played quite nicely here. I think good performance, a vulnerable character, an interesting character, one searching for the truth.
Though I have to admit, I did find myself amused by when she activates, she sees Picard's confused face. And I couldn't shake out of my mind the thought of, well, what if that wasn't linked to that? Maybe she was just going to have that vision anyway. So let's say that they hadn't broken in and attacked her and killed her boyfriend, and things had started to get a bit jiggy. And then in an amorous moment of passion, just suddenly Patrick Stewart's confused face starts looming into view.
And there are obvious influences. It looks very Blade Runner there, doesn't it?
It's very Blade Runner. The whole thing is very Blade Runner. I mean, if you took out synths and replaced it with replicants, yeah.
It is, but I don't mind that because it's a shorthand, isn't it? It means, okay, I know where I am visually, and it's in a dystopia, essentially, which, again...
I didn't particularly have an issue with the sci-fi cliches. My issue was with the painfully 21st century dialogue. It's an issue with modern Star Trek where they just don't seem to talk right. It never seemed to be an issue with Picard himself, which may have been Patrick Stewart's influence, I don't know. But when it was Daj and her boyfriend, that was not good. I was not feeling positive at that point.
It's not dissimilar from Discovery, I think, in some respects. Some of the dialogue there. But I guess you've got to give it time to bed in as well. Sometimes when it's a new character, it sticks out more than it will do later.
But to be fair, I mean, well, for one, she's dead, but also, it was only really in the first couple of scenes. After that, it was, back to normality, really.
Yes, so she encounters Picard and awakes something in him. She's scared. She knows she's... hey.
He's been very lonely with just that dog.
Her arrival gives Jean-Luc Picard some kind of purpose because I guess he's been searching for a damsel in distress in some ways to go and save her and do the right thing.
And the production design kind of reflects that as well. The fact that when you see him around the place, whether consciously or unconsciously, he's dressing in attire that's not particularly dissimilar to his uniform. And the fact you've got the dog, etc., etc.
Yes, and actually, her with her hooded cloak, it's quite medieval as well. Yeah, and that's interesting. Him looking for a dragon to slay, but I guess it doesn't matter. But your necklace is quite unusual. Yes, I got it in Primark. It's not an unusual necklace. It's 2 rings on a bit of string. I don't really... The fact that this becomes such a major kind of plot device, I guess just... It seems... This is the MacGuffin. This reveals all. I would have liked it to be a bit more distinct. Now, I wouldn't want it to be, sci-fi distinct necessarily, like, the photo album in Generations with its shiny paper on it, but it's just 2 rings, though. I don't know.
When that necklace bit happened, and Picard says, "Oh, that's an unusual necklace. May I see?" I turned to my wife and said, "And that's one for Jean-Luc and the pawn shop. Daddy's buying himself his way back into some dream poker."
They are going to be raking the money in when they're selling Star Trek Picard necklaces.
Oh, they're already on Etsy.
Of course they are. It's 2 rings. Hey, Forbidden Planet are selling Doctor Who psychic paper, which is basically just a travel pass holder an empty travel pass holder and selling that at a couple of quid extra, as if that's a feature.
It comes with a white piece of paper as well.
So,
Well.
just as we mentioned some of the clothing there, what do we think of the use of uniforms? Data in that opening scene is wearing the First Contact uniform, I guess the TNG movie uniform, if you want to call it that. Looks like a kind of cheap version of the TNG movie uniform, but out of context, never worn on that ship. Then when he's in the garden, he's got the TNG uniform. Is that just sort of a dream weirdness to throw you off kilter? Or was it just that uniform's better at hiding his neck?
I just thought it was intentional weirdness of the dream sequence. We were seeing Data as he last was in Nemesis. And, this is the first time we've seen him since, so he's wearing the same outfit.
I think that seems like a very good and reasonable explanation. Alex, counter.
I think I think there's very much the difference between your fandom of the show and my casual interest, which has resulted in podcasting about it for 7 years. I didn't even notice.
And while we're on it, Brent Spiner, obviously, we've had some chats because I've complained on the internet that in the trailers he looked wrong, and I'm not meaning that in a the actors got old sort of way, because I acknowledge that and I don't mind that the actors got old, but it's just like the hairline didn't resemble any that Data ever had throughout the run. It was a very bad looking wig. And I don't mind, because I accept people age. And then they had the trailer where they completely flattened him with CGI. But now he looks all right. I think he looks all right. The performance is pretty good. The voice sounds a bit older, but I think it's a fairly decent Data. I think with a better wig they could have probably saved about $4 million. But
He didn't look right in 10 Forward, but in the Vineyard he looked great. The only issue I have with that is that there has been a picture going round of Brent Spiner and Patrick Stewart on set, and Brent Spiner is in all the Data makeup, and he looks better than he does after the CGI. They should have just put him in makeup and just... So what if Brent Spiner's a bit older? It's a dream sequence. It doesn't matter.
Let's deal with the sort of Federation-y sort of sequence. We go to Starfleet archives,
where everything in the quantum archive is locked in stasis. Apparently, stasis,
and we get to see the old LCARS operating system used in TNG, a very nice touch. I liked seeing that opening up, and the painting is locked away, but obviously this is an opportunity for lots of nice touches, mainly the Captain Picard Day banner.
Yeah, can someone explain to me what's going on with the ego bunker? I mean, it's an archive, I understand that, but it's not really, is it? It's a storage unit.
Do you not have a room dedicated to yourself?
It's weird. No one has been in here, have they? No one must penetrate my ego bunker.
I guess it's... I was really hoping to see the curl on Nescar, but he did drop it on the ground during the events of Generation. Smash it. But...
He rescued the Picard Day banner, but not any of his special... artifacts, archaeological finds. He doesn't rescue archaeological finds. He rescues the all-important banner and the painting that Data made for him.
I would have just loved to see the Hall gun just in the corner.
That's all that is in Riker's archive.
And just some really explicit art.
That Data painted for
the
him.
underwear of all the crew members that he's defiled.
And a chair with one arm worn down.
I mean, that was... I guess it was getting close to nostalgia for nostalgia's sake, but again, it didn't really impact the plot, so I don't I don't mind it.
I think that's certainly if you're going to do it, that's the way to do it. Have it as a background detail while something else is going on in the scene, and you can argue again comparing it to the other Star franchise, the where Star Wars has had the Mandalorian. They have an episode that goes to Tatooine, but all of the sort of fan servicey stuff is generally a background detail without it having too much attention drawn on it. It's the way to do it, really.
Yeah, I think so. And then we go to the Daystrom Institute. Obviously, that's got continuity with the original series, and it's mentioned all the time.
There was a weird line there, if you noticed, where he says, "Oh, it's like a ghost town," and she says, "Yeah, in more ways than one." Yeah. What? oh, it's just our resident ghost, Steve. In more ways than one.
But I guess it's an exposition heavy visit here, and I really like Alison Pill as an actress. Like, you know, she's in Scott Pilgrim, and she was in the Newsroom, a good, very very good kind of quite quirky actor, and I guess she delivers the exposition, you know, following the unfortunate event with kind of like a veteran Star Trek performer. But do you recognize this necklace? Yes, it's 2 rings. Very common necklace. Of course, her mentor is Maddox, who we met in Star Trek Next Generation's The Measure of a Man. To me, sounds like he's a bit of a Colonel Kurtz figure almost. Like, you know, we're going to journey in to find him. That sort of thing, I don't know. It's there, so use it, but it also feels to me like a novel. You know, the Star Trek Expanded Universe, like where everyone we've met before must be kind of connected somehow.
Well, season 2 is going to be about finding Argyle. They have to find him. He is the most important man in the galaxy. Or I guess the letter writing campaign that Argyle is writing. That's what's going to happen in season 2. But I think it would be so funny if Bruce Maddox comes back before Worf, before Crusher, before everyone else in Star Trek. If they bring back this one character from a random episode in season 2.
While Michael Dorn watches, copy of Captain Worf in his hand, sat watching the phone thinking, any moment now, any moment, it must be time for Dorney.
One thing I do like in this scene is they established that B4 was never taken over by Data. Data died at the end of Nemesis, and he's been dead since. That makes Nemesis that little bit more effective.
As they mentioned in Star Trek Countdown, which was at the time an in-canon comic written by Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci, who wrote Star Trek 2009, Data was brought back.
Glad you spent money on that now.
Oh yeah. They said it was canon, but in that Data was captain of the Enterprise, and he had just taken over the body of B4, and other novels filled in some details on that about how he tried not to, but eventually he just overpowered his simpleton brother. But yeah, that's such a cheap trick, and actually it was obviously set up to do that in the film, because I know there was a sequel sort of in planning, which would have apparently incorporated elements of Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. That will never happen. But yeah, I mean, that it was kind of a cheap trick. Resurrecting Spock was one thing, but it's hard to repeat that trick. So in dream sequences, fine. B4 in a drawer, great. But you're expecting to see Data or a version of Data again at some point this season, right?
I mean,
B4 in a drawer. It's like Elf on a shelf.
Every Christmas we put up the torso. If the children aren't well behaved, the crotch comes out. I mean, it is quite bleak now that B4 showed some degree of increasing intelligence at the end of Nemesis, and then because of the results of the events that are depicted at the start of this, they did just dismantle him and put him in a drawer. I mean, it feels like the end of Of Mice and Men. It's slightly bleak. Which, yes, I get is the point.
I think it is. I can believe them banning androids in some way, because actually every character that you encounter in the Next Generation, in The Measure of the Man, you have Maddox, who wants to take Data away, take him apart, upload his brain, and one day he'll be able to make lots of them. And, he is not a nice man. And then in The Offspring, where Data creates a daughter called Lao, you have Admiral Halftel, who basically is the same character, who doesn't really think that androids are individuals or have rights and are property of the Federation. And that's a debate. And that stuff sort of continued in Voyager with the holograms, which have gained sentience. So I imagine there's something to be explored in that as well, whether artificial intelligence can also be part of holograms, because obviously holograms in this world are a very useful thing. But what do you think of that overall plot strand, that basically human or humanoid biological offspring can be made from Data, apparently fairly simply?
It's just science jargon as guff to get to a point, really, isn't it? I mean, it's bollocks, basically, isn't it? But it's one of those logical leaps that I guess you have to make. I kind of almost feel like they're trying to send up how ridiculous it is in the previous bit by having Picard come in and say, "You can tell me if it's possible to make a sentient android out of flesh and blood." It's ridiculous, but it's just a narrative leap, I feel.
It's all a bit bicentennial, man.
Yeah.
I don't think you can really quantify what that means, because, they're a flesh and blood android, which of course we got to see because she melted in acid, delightfully, and then exploded everywhere. I don't know what that means, because obviously she has super strength, she has super hearing, she has extra knowledge. Then why the biological element at all? I guess, but that seems to be an idea that is around a lot at the moment. It is in the zeitgeist.
You're thinking of the Terminator franchise, aren't you?
You kind of had it in the Terminator Dark Fate, but you definitely have it in Battlestar Galactica. You definitely have it in Westworld. You've had it in Humans fairly recently. You have it in Blade Runner, which is, I guess, in some ways the granddaddy. I mean, I suppose you can go back to Metropolis if you're looking for stuff like this. So were you shocked by the explosion of Daj? Because I think we quite liked her, and we were all thinking, oh yeah, it's this storyline, and it's sort of the Logan storyline. The old warrior is protecting the young girl, and Logan is the reason the show exists. I would say, and then they kill her off, which in some ways I think quite shocking.
I do think that with any story where a robot, an android, whatever it be, dies, there is always that thing in the back of your mind where you're going, well, they'll just bring them back anyway. So it's surprising, but not shocking, I would say. It's very much in the oeuvre of ideas that you would do. So it just felt like a natural thing that they might do at some point.
Yeah, I think so. And then you've obviously just got the exposition is them. They're made as twins, and I just thought, what? How do we have this much for what? Okay. And then smash cut. Oh look, there's another one.
Not the first elderly man to be excited by the prospect of young twin girls.
It's cheap. It's a cheap gag.
Hey, twin girls is not cheap.
So I guess we go to a Romulan research station where not Daj is there. She does impressive work, and a sexy young Romulan man is impressed by her. I guess we don't know anything about this, but interesting tease. Pull back. Oh my god, it's a Borg cube, just like we saw in the opening title sequence.
Quite like the idea that they've been teasing this show with a shot of a Borg cube and it actually turns out that the Borg aren't going to appear in it, and it's all going to be about synths and Romulans.
I'd be amazed if they didn't. I can't believe that Kurtzman's going to make a show where he doesn't do that.
Seems like nice, pulling the rug from under us. I mean, obviously we have 7 of 9 who's going to come into it, and Hugh is going to come back, but I like the idea that they're actually going to, keep that Borg card for a bit later, season 2 or 3, then we can bring the Borg into it.
Don't be so naive. I think they've been looking for a way to bring the Borg in for a while. I was surprised, that Star Trek Beyond, what it was, they didn't look in the cupboard and go, "Oh, I've not done the Borg in a while," even though it doesn't fit in with that series or that timeline. It's the
didn't stop Enterprise.
It's the thing the general public know about Star Trek. They know Captain Kirk, they know the Enterprise, they know Klingons, they know the Borg. So I would suspect, given the casting of Jonathan Del Arco as Hugh and Jerry Ryan as 7 of 9, they're going to play a fairly big part. And I'm sure it'll be a different take. There'll be a sort of diaspora of people who are former Borg and now they've been reintegrated into society, but maybe they're not accepted or reintegrated into society, and that'll be a metaphor for something else. But while we're on that, I guess, what are you expecting to see? What's next? Where do you think this series is going to go?
To Troy and Riker's house.
Purely in terms of structure, I think that you might have a similar state of affairs again to what The Mandalorian had, which is, if I was going to make any criticism off the bat of that series, it's that it starts off, you have 3 episodes that are very much one continuous plot, a 4th one that isn't, but ties in, and 2 episodes at the end that are very much following on from the plot of the first 3 with a bit of the 4th, and then the 5th and the 6th are, they add elements, but really they're very tangential. I think probably are going to end up with something very similar here, that we're going to end up with the first 3 parts being pretty much following the story, getting going on the mission, maybe an episode after that pushing forward, and then just diverting off, buggering about with something else for a bit.
I'm happy for it to take its time to tell the story at a leisurely pace. I don't want the huge big planets exploding and, the Borg returning and killing everyone and every single person in the universe being at risk of dying suddenly because the most important person in the galaxy has to be saved. I just want a nice leisurely show, at which the first episode for the most part was, apart from a couple of scenes, and just have a story which can breathe and don't have the camera panning from side to side like Discovery always had. This is a show which has got the cinematography for the most part right, and it's got the pace for the most part right.
I mean, you would assume it's going to end up in the sort of direction of political thriller to some degree. There's going to be some sort of expansion, if not this series, then you would expect in next, of what happened on the attack on Mars. And presumably it's not what you think it was, etc., etc., yada yada. I expect that you probably will have the Borg tied into it somewhere. I'd be amazed again if they didn't.
I mean, that's the hope that I have, that the show is about what happened on Mars, and there is more to just the Federation turned evil. That there is some sort of shadowy influence, just like in Next Generation. There's some sort of shadowy influence, and that's what got us into the horrible position we're in. Now they're gone, everything's back to normal and nice again. I want it to end with everything being back to normal.
I don't necessarily have an issue with them doing that, though. I mean, you mentioned it at the start of the episode here, Andrew, Darren Franich's review, where he said there's the worrying possibility that someone in the writer's room went, what about a false flag attack. Yeah, and I read that and went, yeah, that is concerning. So I would hope that they tread carefully, because Christ knows there's been occasions in the past where Star Trek has not tread carefully.
I think you don't want it to be giving itself a pat on the back. Look how clever we're being. Oh, look, we're referencing this. You know, like in Avatar when they say shock and awe. And it's like, oh, yeah, like that's the thing. You know what we're talking about. And it's just a bit weak. And I guess that's background details in some ways. But yes, I want there to be an unraveling of, oh, there's something much bigger here than you possibly know about. But yeah, I'd like to be surprised, and not in a really twisty way. I just want to see something new. I appreciate Darren Franick's frustrations. It's interesting. I read the positive reviews and I read some negative reviews, and I sort of agreed with them both, because there's a new Star Trek franchise, and not one of them is actually making what is classically Star Trek, which is an episodic, optimistic adventure show where you explore the current political landscape through metaphors and allegories and morality plays and characters and a little bit of silliness and comedy, all with a sort of military kind of Starfleet overview. Because Discovery's not that. I don't know what Discovery is, but it's an individual lead, and it's kind of bonkers in some ways, but just awful in others. And sometimes it shows a glimpse and you think, oh, that's great. And this is obviously an older man. He doesn't have a crew, doesn't have the backing of the Federation. So I can see why people are frustrated, because they want something that they understand to be Star Trek. And none of these things are Star Trek. And the next thing we're getting is a comedy cartoon. And it's all these things that both are and are not, that are so deeply indebted. You know, Discovery is, oh, it's Spock's sister. Oh, here's the Enterprise. Here's Spock. Here's Pike. Here's the Mirror Universe. Here's all these things you already know. And here already, we've got, here is Data. Here is Picard. Here is Maddox. Here is the Daystrom Institute. These things that you're already familiar with being built on, which is why it's like expanded universe stuff. Discovery as well. I think that criticism can be levelled at that too. It's like the novels or the comic books, and it doesn't feel like it's necessarily its own thing or the key thing that it is. But what I will say is we've moved forward in time post Nemesis. Great to see that. We've got a fresh landscape, and you know, we've not seen all of it yet. I'm sure there are great ships and great adventures and good people still, but we're seeing this from the point of view of a cynical, jaded, broken old man. So that's his worldview and how he's come to view it. So you know, there's lots to explore there. I don't think it's quite saying everything is awful, everything is bad, but there's certainly a feeling that things are not right in the universe.
Yeah, it feels like we've stopped buying Tunbridge Wells and we've taken that as a indicative view of the political landscape of the entire UK.
Well, we've done enough talking, I think, about the overall episode, but let's visit our favourite location, Chateau Quickfire.
I've got to say, in the opening scene where Picard's having his Earl Grey, but it's decaffeinated now because he's older, I thought that was a truly awful looking cup of tea. I mean, it was so milky. It just looked dreadful. And
well, they don't want to have to change the sheets every night.
And it got me thinking, you know, I don't know anyone that takes milk in Earl Grey. And then I thought, I don't remember Picard taking it in the episodes I've seen, and then I started to question myself. I had to go and look it up online, and then I started to see disagreements saying, oh no, the British have milk in their Earl Grey, the Americans don't. I went, what? That doesn't sound right to me at all. And I ended up going down a very deep, dark Wikipedia hole. I eventually ended up with the opinion of someone called Edward Barrow, who I feel gave the definitive answer to this question, which is obviously the most important question raised out of this episode. He said that, as others have said, it's a matter of taste. Personally, I don't care much for tea that smells like a tart's knicker drawer. I like tea to be tea, and I find that Earl Grey tea with milk is even nastier than tea without. My wife likes Earl Grey. It's not the only thing she's wrong about.
This is the third television series that Patrick Stewart has appeared in as Jean-Luc Picard, having starred in all 7 seasons of Star Trek Next Generation and the pilot episode for Deep Space Nine, Emissary.
The knives used by the Romulan assassins are similar to Riemann knives seen in Nemesis. Does this mean that the Riemanns may appear in Star Trek Picard? No.
Cassidy Yates, who was Ben Sisko's girlfriend and mother of his child in Deep Space Nine, she gets a name check in a scene in Boston on an advert. Cassidy Yates, Interstellar Freights. So, there you go. Some more continuity for you there. The Romulan Borg cube shows a symbol of the Romulan Empire, but instead of it clutching Romulus and Remus in its talons, it has nothing.
And of course, for fans looking to do some outside reading based on the themes of this episode, you can find some more crimes committed by synths on Love Beach by Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
So, in Star Trek 2009, Nero says,
I was off-planet, doing my job while your Federation did nothing, and allowed my people to burn while your planet broke in half.
So that's continuity there, because that's what happens in this as well.
This first episode of Star Trek Picard is preceded by a short trek called The Children of Mars, a prequel to the series of Picard. Why is that fact interesting? Well, it's probably not if you're in the United States. If you're in the UK, of course, you can't watch it. Great thinking. Although, actually, having watched it illegally, that's probably the preferable position. For anyone that wants to know what happens, some children at school, Mars is attacked, and David Bowie's Heroes is stretched out to an incredible length. I really felt it was a worthwhile 8 minutes of my evening.
Why does Mars have an explosive atmosphere? It's been terraformed.
They just mean it's a really happening place.
Okay, just a quick straw poll. Do you think anyone else from TNG who has not been announced yet will appear this series?
There will be a surprise cameo. I think it will be Geordie.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. Although there's a large part of me thinking, will Denise Crosby appear as Sela? This show was created by Akiva Goldsman, Michael Chabon, Kirsten Bear and Alex Kurtzman, a new record for a Star Trek show to get 4 created by credits, as well as a based on Star Trek The Next Generation created by Gene Roddenberry, which not even the Star Trek Next Generation films got, because they were just credited as based upon Star Trek by Gene Roddenberry. So, that's all interesting. During the poker game at the start of the episode in the dream sequence, Data plays 5 Queens of Hearts. Does that mean we're looking for 5 versions of Dash? Yeah, probably. Well, that about wraps up that episode. So, what do you say? We'll be back in a couple of weeks covering episodes 2 and 3, and then we'll be back every couple of weeks after that until the season finale, when we'll be there to talk all about that and a season wrap up. How does that sound, everyone?
I mean, I haven't got anything else on, so...
I mean, there's nothing else on TV.
Thanks for your enthusiasm and thanks for joining us for this first episode. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.